So what is your knowledge of history about?
History is about what happened in the past. So, and that's the simple answer, right? What happened in the past, and trying to know what happened, why it happened, how it's connected to other things that have happened, and trying to find out as much about that as we can.
What practical problems can be solved through applying this knowledge?
To some extent, you can take historical knowledge, I think, and apply it to present problems, political problems especially. Maybe that's just what I like studying is political history and diplomatic history especially. And so you can look at current issues and maybe try to apply and say, can we learn from decisions that were made in the past, and what would happen if we applied that to today's situation? I don't know if we as a society or as leaders, if they really do that and do that well, but at least on the individual level, right? My personal knowledge, when I'm voting, I'm trying to think of, what are the issues today? What does this candidate propose today? And is there anything I can take that I know about the past that can help me make the best decision today? But the other thing is that I think it just can help you understand today. Not necessarily the future, but just the present. Like, how did we get to where we are? So the problems of today. And then you could, try to apply other ideas to how to get to the future. But just to understand how did we get here? That's why I like studying history.
What role does language play in the accumulation of knowledge in this area?
Language is huge in history because it's all about choosing the right word to explain what happened. That on two levels, language is important. When you're trying to interpret what happened in the past, a lot of the evidence is written, or oral. It's language, and so it's trying to understand, well, what did this person mean when they said this, and how can I understand the situation that way? But then it's also about choosing the right words to explain it yourself. When you're writing your answer for an exam, when you're a historian, writing an article, writing a book, or just if someone asks you the question and you're talking about history, like the way you explain it and the words that you choose, make a difference. Some words are really loaded, and that will play a role in kind of the emotional understanding of the situation, but just every word matters in history. It's super important.
What are the assumptions underlying the methods that are used for gaining knowledge in history?
That's a tricky question. Actually, I hadn't really thought about in terms of history. The assumptions underlying the methods.
Yeah.
One thing for me is that I do assume that there is an answer, but I don't assume that we can find the answer. Like, something happened in the past, and there was a reason for it, but probably it was a really complex reason. But I do assume that, the truth exists. Now the question is, can we find the truth? You assume, I guess, that each source is just one piece of the story, and that's why you need to look at lots of different sources and consider different perspectives and try to find that truth. But I think just the assumption that there is truth is part of it, and then digging through all of the evidence, selecting what's the most important evidence to try to best understand it.
Are there any ethical thinking constraints that in the method that is used to gain knowledge?
Not so much. Definitely not compared to some other areas of knowledge, like in the sciences. Ethical constraints on gaining knowledge. Some things, a lot of it is just painful. So on a personal level, a lot of what has happened in the past has been harmful and sad and horrible. And so, it's a risk just trying to find out. You're reading stories about people's experiences that were perhaps really painful, and looking at photos that are, video footage. especially in 20th century history. So on a personal level, I think there's ethical problems. I forget exactly what the question was.
Thinking constraints.
Yeah. But no, I mean, I think overall, just seeking the knowledge, you're not too constrained ethically, except for how you don't know what you're going to find and how you're going to react to that. So it might hurt, it might emotionally affect you.
How has the history of history led to its current form as an area of knowledge?
So the history of history is called historiography, and in any topic in history, it's interesting to look at the historiography. How has the story changed? How have we changed the way we tell the story? Partly that might change because of new evidence. For example, in the history of the Cold War, and trying to understand, what motivated the actions of the Soviet Union, or what did they know? There's a big difference between what was written before the fall of the Soviet Union and after the fall of the Soviet Union, because documents that had previously been classified became, people had access to them. So that's one way that the story may change if there's new evidence. The story may also change just with new ideas, like historians are always in a certain point in time. So again, with the Cold War, historiography of the Cold War is interesting because if you just look at how American historians told the story, being very involved in it as it was happening, most of the history that was written in the 50s, was very critical of the Soviet Union. It's the Soviet Union's fault, etc. It's kind of the orthodox American explanation for the Cold War. And then in the Vietnam War in the 1960s, Americans started to really question more, like, wait, what is our government doing, and why are we doing this? And recognizing some mistakes, and that played out in current events, but then that also played out in history and how historians were telling the story. And so these new histories came out that were much more critical of the United States' role in the origins of the Cold War in the 40s and the 50s. And then that kind of was tempered a little bit later to go back to be like, well, Stalin deserves some scrutiny. So, I mean, any story in history, looking at the contributions of women, I mean, that's a real modern theme in history that historians just ignored before. It wasn't important. So, adding that perspective and just looking for, the voices that weren't included in the past is something that a lot of modern historians have done, which I think really enriches it. It gets us closer to the truth, because the truth is complex, so the more different perspectives we have helps us understand it better.
What are the implications of this shared area of knowledge for one's own individual perspective?
Couple things. One, I think it's just interesting. So for the implication for your personal knowledge is it's fun to read. You can ask questions and relate all these different things. You can take knowledge about big events in history, and then when you're reading literature or watching movies, or you can apply that to understand the situation better. You could even take that and write your own. I have these fantasies of writing a historical novel someday when I get tired of teaching. Taking that. I don't know. I just think it's interesting. It also can help help people form your identity. To think about where did my culture come from, and what things have people been through, or I like studying questions of justice and like the civil rights movement and things like that. And there is no answer, but I always kind of ask myself, what would I have done? I hope I would have done, and then I look at these examples of people who took these great risks, and maybe I can apply that to the future someday. I don't know.
Yeah, thank you.